Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Cooking Up Conversions, How Allrecipes.com optimized its way to the top. Our speakers for today are Paul Krylov and Carl Fredericks. Paul Krylov is the Senior Manager of Acquisition Marketing and Consumer Revenue at Allrecipes.com. Having been with the company for a year and a half, he is responsible for user acquisition efforts, both for new traffic channel development and user registration initiatives. He's a born and raised Seattleite, and as expected, his kitchen contains no less than 3 different ways of making coffee, none of them being standard drip. Carl Fredericks is a senior managing consultant for retail and consumer brands at Maximizer. Having worked in the website optimization space for over 10 years, Carl has extensive knowledge in customer experience optimization and works with top brands such as Harry & David, Epson, and Forever 21. We encourage everyone to socialize with us during today's webinar. Maximizer's Twitter handle is @Maximizer. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to send them through the control panel and GoToWebinar or on Twitter, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Okay, take it away, Carl.
Great, thank you, Anna. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Paul. Glad to be with you again. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the realities that we've observed as we're thinking about executing successful optimization programs and some of the things that we think all of our clients and potential clients should be considering as they go through that process and that journey of optimization. A little bit of context about what we do. Oracle Maximizer enables companies to test and deliver optimized experiences across e-commerce digital platforms. So think of desktops, tablets, iPhones, things of that nature. Our software platform enables us to test in an A/B and multivariate format. It enables personalization ranging from rules-based to algorithmically driven modeling. And then it has a robust baked-in analytics and reporting system that allows us to understand at a very granular level what impact our testing is doing with regard to visitor behaviors in kind of a one-size-fits-all aggregate model, as well as individual audience segments. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this exercise and this presentation today. The last component of Oracle Maximizer is the in-house consulting practice, which supports the strategy and execution of said CXO programs. Just to give you a little context around the CXO space and how we're positioned in it, Oracle's Maximizer was named the leader in the Forrester Wave report for online testing in Q3 of last year. Maximizer was ranked highest in the current offering and the strategy of online testing for platforms in that review. You can see here that there are a whole host of other players in the space, and obviously the key metrics that we want to focus on are, of course, building a good strategy, the right strategy, and making sure that the offering is something that is feasible and manageable for clients of all sizes. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about customer conversion, the fact that conversion is in fact a choice. We've all probably done some recent online shopping, and we go back to the retailers and the on-site e-commerce experiences that serve us best. I think, as visitors convert, we'd all agree that it's an affirmation of creating a win-win situation, and that's really important, certainly from an internal perspective as well. And we'll talk a little bit about the audiences and the team members internally that are impacted by successful optimization programs. I think it's important here to note that a successful conversion event is not necessarily just a purchase event. I think there are a whole host of conversion events that happen along the journey to a purchase event, and it's those sorts of micro-conversion events that really drive the lifetime value and the benefit to visitors along the way. And I think that really helps and justifies the fact that testing should happen at multiple stages throughout the customer's journey. So we'll talk a little bit about what that journey looks like now. Obviously, if we think of, certainly from a retail perspective, where I tend to focus the majority of my energy, it's that buy event, it's that final conversion event that is so essential for the business and for our customers, right? Making sure that they actually get to the shopping cart and get checked out. I think that we're trying to build out a lifetime value model that is going to be sustainable and good for all parties involved, I think there are several influencing factors, though, that have to be tested and optimized along the way. It's not just that final buy event. So when you consider a buyer, you're thinking a first-time buyer versus a repeat customer. As you think about other activities and KPIs that are available on your site, certainly the subscription component is key, whether you're a first-time subscriber or you're renewing, whether you're getting enrolled in a loyalty program or a membership activity. That's obviously building in some value and some, if that process is smooth, that furthers the engagement that the visitor is showing for your site. Obviously, if you're engaging with them in terms of an open or a share or a review model, perhaps you want them to print content or like it on a social network. All of those little touch points too certainly influence how visitors and long-standing customers actually will respond to your site, whether you're getting them to apply for an account or a policy or some sort of membership, donating money or time or goods, and then certainly from a service perspective, whether you're trying to get them to right driver download at the right moment, whether there are service packs that are available to that visitor for a very specific product. All those sorts of things are essential and really driving the long-term lifetime value across all those multiple stages. I think that's essential for a testing consideration when you actually switch gears and go into a testing model within your organization. So as organizations kind of move from one component or one stage of the maturity cycle or the maturity curve to other parts of that curve, you have to consider that there are A/B tests. There are very simple tests that you're running to get started, and as that arrow extends up into the upper right-hand corner, what we're then doing is we're looking at not just an A/B or simplified MVT test, but one that actually runs simultaneous tests across multiple audience segments. It's with this approach that we're really driving the program from a testing examination piece, which one works better, A or B, to one that which one works better, A or B, for a specific audience. And it could be a targeted audience. It could be someone who's very specific need. They've exhibited that intent based on an email click, perhaps, or a display media ad click, or a specific keyword search that they've done on a site-side search module. So all of those things really drive that added personalization aspect and are key to driving a happy customer forward. So I think in a retail space, certainly what we see with inclement weather, there are in fact trends that we're seeing with weather patterns and how that relates to the content shown on the site. If you've got freezing cold temperatures in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, that might be a great opportunity to promote products or that are attuned to that sort of weather pattern. Whereas if it's warming, if there's a warming trend somewhere, there could be alternate products that are best suited for the homepage hero image, for example. I think too the importance there is that whether it's weather or whether it's some other component or aspect of your audience, it's key to know that being able to have the CRM, a DMP, some sort of a personalized, maximizer-based data segments that we can build custom to achieve that. Those sorts of data elements are key to be able to integrate into our system and into a testing program to make sure that you're really unlocking those details for a specific audience. So let's talk a little bit about websites and apps and investments. I think we all are certainly aware of the power of digital commerce, and the growth year on year is everything I'm reading is in excess of 20%. 75% of America last year made a digital purchase. Basically, the latest figure I had from the finance space is that just over 25% of new bank account applications are actually started on mobile devices. So there's obviously a focus that really needs attention here, and I think as people and businesses spend money to drive that business, they have to think and maybe change their mindset in terms of how that actually plays out. generally speaking, 90 to 95% of digital marketing spend is really focused on acquisition. So that's the paid search, it's banner ads, it's retargeting, blogs, SEO, those sorts of things, with only about 5 to 10% allocated towards building that on-site win-win experience. I think what we've seen too is that the types of visitors that are arriving on site have a couple different propensities to purchase, right? You've got the high propensity, cash in hand, ready to go. You've got low propensity folks who are just really kicking tires and kind of examining all their different options. And then the group in the middle there I'll talk about is the majority group today, which is the conditional propensity. And this audience is really the one that that's fairly malleable, right? We can get them the right information at the right time, answer their questions, build that base trust, give them the information they require, and get them to check out, get them to engage, get them to click and convert at whatever KPI level that is. That's really where the sweet spot is in terms of getting the most bang for your buck, at least in the recent testing waves that we've done. It's that audience that is most suitable to target for testing. So what does that mean? What that means is that that greater than sign is going to flip around, and we're going to look to try to drive and our focus on conversion. And how best to do that, in our opinion, is really to come up with a testing program that examines all those different points along the visitor journey, as we saw earlier, and then also expand across the maturity curve, starting simple, going up, making things more complex, examining specific audiences, and really examining from a multivariate perspective all the different things that you can try to optimize. And in doing so, what we're seeing is that the return is generally in the 10x range if the program is put on its feet properly and stood up with the right team members. That sort of approach really drives a lot of long-term value to the business. So this happiness concept, I think we all agree that there are things that are going to make us happy today, and there will be things that make us happy tomorrow. That preference can change. It can change overnight based on something we've seen on TV or an experience out in the marketplace. And I think that this sort of personalization and dynamic personalization is key to a successful program long term. So it's kind of the me today and the me tomorrow model. So I think it's really important that providing those relevant experiences really is an additional form or derivation of optimization, and one that furthers and promotes the idea of ongoing optimization. It's not just a test it today and set it indefinitely as an optimal rule. It is, in fact, an iterative approach that's critical. The personalization, I think, is defined as providing the right offer at the right time. And I think that everyone would agree that's a very common and baseline definition of personalization. But I think there's a third and very important element that is providing the right offer at the right time in the right context. What we're finding with our clients is that about 50% of lift comes from the offer itself. Buy one, get one, 50% off today, or this weekend only, that sort of thing. The other 50% is really coming from the way it's presented. And I think because of this testing and personalization and insights are critically integrated. So it's not just about the fact that you've got an offer, it's really how it's presented. And I think some of the things that we're seeing in the real world as far as the cart page optimization, for example, what does it look like to optimize a cart page? Is this the right place for recommendations? Is this where you want to reiterate savings messages, like how much you've saved by buying today? Do you want to let, or even promote visitors to shop more? You think of a continue shopping link and the importance of that, or does that derail them from their checkout process and actually negatively impact the business? Is this the right place to highlight promotional codes or free shipping, payment options, whether it's PayPal or some other custom card that you may have for that particular retailer? Those sorts of things all manifest in different ways, and I think without testing, in that particular example on a cart page, you won't really uncover what's making people happy and how that landscape is changing. And so testing is imperative in that particular example. So we talked a lot about making clients and customers happy, and I think we all get that. That's obviously key. But the brand needs to be happy as well. I think the team needs to be happy, and we all know that there's several teams involved in different stages of an optimization program and a personalization program, and we'll talk a little bit about that group today, and some of the ones that surface in my mind in my retail space most often. The first is the risk group, and I would say that the folks involved with the risk piece tend to be the IT folks. So the IT team members are the internal stakeholders who are trying to understand the impact of site-wide changes and redesigns. So if we are in fact going to go down the path of redesign, they want to make sure that things are going to function, that people can find what they want, that links aren't going to be broken, and so they're very cautious about that approach. And I think if you have the right testing tool, one that enables you to examine content without impacting the site performance, without impacting functionality on the site, while in fact testing functionality, testing the placement of different modules and nodes and interstitial pages and pop-up modals and things of that nature, that's really where you'll set IT's mind at ease, certainly from an integration standpoint and initial setup, but plus any additional work and minimizing the amount of work and effort that they'll have to put in to actually get a testing program underway. The second group I consider the data and technical team. So when hotels, for example, and travel chains are trying to figure out how best to upsell, there's arguably a big data warehouse back-end solution that needs to be deployed. That's going to cost money, right? That's going to be a very big investment, and even if you've got just a couple of properties to update, that's going to take time and months. So I think that the upsell examination is critical for businesses to really understand what the hypothesis is, and then develop a series of tests using a select group of properties to make sure that upsell approach is really going to work, whether it's a placement or a presentation or, again, kind of a technical, functional pop-up modal. How is that really best going to serve that group? And the last one I would say sits with finance, and free shipping is a great example, and it's one that we see all the time now in retail. What does that free shipping model look like? Is it a free shipping model that's based on threshold? Have you reached a certain threshold to get it? Is it by weight? Is it pay once and then subsequent shipments are free or discounted? Is it free for members? Is there some other avenue that you can take? And I think understanding what those different levels of risk are, being able to test them, and then take that logic and that understanding back to finance will then allow you to actually implement the free shipping model that's right for your business. All right. I wanted to highlight testing just at its root base level, and just note that it's compelling to have the right image and get that first level of engagement, especially on a home page where there are a whole host of different objectives. When visitors get to a home page, they could be there for a whole, any number of different reasons. But I think if we're trying to drive engagement, for example, I wanted to just highlight an example where there might be an imagery option that may generate that additional click, whether it's to download a coupon or just find out more about the product, whatever the case may be. And I took the example of a Skittles product. So obviously we all know Skittles, and maybe Skittles as a standalone image, certainly something that most of us would recognize from their packaging and their advertising, which is throughout different forms of media. However, there may be a better option if I'm trying to drive initial engagement, and maybe there's a celebrity endorsement, and I'm sure Paul is well aware of the tie-in here to Marshawn Lynch and his affinity for Skittles, and maybe that sort of celebrity approach is key to driving that extra level of engagement. It becomes a little more personalized, and people get a bit more excited about it. So maybe there's a tie-in with a celebrity image, and I would suggest as a part one for a baseline test is to actually just run an A/B, no celebrity versus celebrity, and just see how that plays out. Now, in this example, let's say that we're finding that the celebrity endorsement does in fact work. I think there's a follow-up test. And again, this kind of talks to the maturity curve in evolving your program. The part 2 might be to test multiple celebrities against, head-to-head and see which one works best. So here I would add in perhaps a more regional, Western region celebrity. It's Peyton Manning here with his packet of Skittles to see if there's in fact some sort of tie-in there. Maybe, again, it becomes a regional question and a regional-based optimal solution. But if the celebrity piece works, then start trying multiple celebrities. I think if you extend beyond that and really think about a regional model, it's a very faint silhouette there of the United States, but you can start to see how that model could be placed across multiple markets to really drive the highest level of affinity, drive happy clients to do and engage in the way we want them to. So you've got Marshawn Lynch, you've got Peyton Manning, you've got the San Diego market, you've got the Dallas market, you've got Pittsburgh, and I apologize, Paul. I know that the whole Cam Newton thing recently is a bit challenging to digest, but I needed to put him in there as a good Southeast representative. And of course, in the Northeast, we've got Tom Brady up there. But again, this really talks about personalization, identifying the right celebrity, targeting by geography, and really trying to unlock that added value of a personalized experience, building that happy client relationship, and really speaking to the needs and the desires of those regional clients. So with that, I just wanted to kind of wrap up by saying, this is a very simplified example of a way to evolve a testing program, one that starts off A/B, evolves into something that's also A/B, but geographically targeted and segmented, taking us from a one-size-fits-all to a truly personalized, audience-based model here. And I think that's really how we're seeing our clients build out healthy, happy client relationships with their customer base, and really what's moving the needle for our group. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul and let him take over from here.
Thanks, Carl. Boy, Cam Newton and Tom Brady in the same slide. So painful for us Seattleites.
Painful.
Well, thanks for having me today. So what I want to talk about, I want to build on what Carl was talking about and share sort of our practical experience from our first year of testing and personalization, and what we feel have been kind of the key lessons of what it takes to make that program take off in that first critical year when you're kind of trying to make your way. So three things I'm going to share today. So first of all, I want to provide an introduction to Allrecipes, just to provide a little bit of the context in which our testing and personalization is taking place. Talk about how we think about the journey towards customer experience management and personalization, and sort of the phases that we think we'll go through. And then share some of our lessons from that first year, both in terms of how we've approached testing and sort of our foibles in our early tests, and then also some of the roles that we think are key to being successful. So first of all, a little bit about Allrecipes for those who may not know Allrecipes, or maybe a few things that you may not know about Allrecipes if you are familiar with us. So we are the world's largest food website. We have over 40 million unique visitors per month. We operate in, I think it's 23 countries and 12 languages around the world. More importantly, we view ourselves as pioneers in the social use of the web. So nowadays, food and social media are practically synonymous. If your Instagram feed and your Facebook feed are anything like mine, they're full of food porn and people posting photos of awesome meals that they've had. But back when we first got our start, all the way back in 1997, which almost seems hard to believe, it really wasn't self-evident at all. Those two things really didn't go hand in hand. But our founders were actually a group of anthropologists from the University of Washington, And they had a belief that food was this very particular cultural expression. It was a way that cultures are shared and sustained. And that was the thinking behind the establishment of CookieRecipe.com, which is actually our precursor site. And they created that specifically so that people could share cookie recipes. And it wasn't about celebrity chefs sharing their cookie recipes. It was about home cooks sharing those recipes with one another. And that was really the belief at the core of the site. And we're still very much dedicated to that today. And in fact, late last year, we launched a redesign of our website that overhauled our code base, modernized it, made us fully responsive across all devices, including, incidentally, print. We're one of the rare websites that has rolled out a magazine. In our case, it's a very successful one. But a lot of the purpose behind that relaunch was to put the home cook front and center, make it easier for people to connect around food. And so a little over a year ago, we launched a testing, automation, and personalization program, and we chose Maximizer as our provider for that. So I just want to share how we think about our journey towards customer experience management, towards that point that Carl described of really getting a personalized experience for our users. So I think I speak for everyone when I say this is where we want to get to. We want an ultra super sophisticated predictive segmentation model where we're really able to deliver what the user wants before they even know what they want. And we want it for a number of reasons. I mean, one, it's good for the user. Two, it's good for our business. Three, selfishly, it allows me to use terms like big data and predictive and actually mean something and not have it just be a buzzword. So in talking with other folks who have been down this path and have more experience with predictive uses of data than we do, I think we kind of acknowledge to ourselves that it's a journey. So my first advice would be, be prepared. You have to walk before you run. And we think of the evolution in kind of a couple of different phases. One is early on, you may do some manual testing. It's labor intensive, and a lot of times it's inconclusive, but at least it starts to get you in that mindset of thinking about data, thinking about what it's telling you about your users. The next leap, and I would call it a leap, is that moment when you decide to automate, because you're probably going to make a fairly significant investment. You've got an outside tool. But it's a big quantum jump forward in the level of sophistication that you're able to bring to what you're doing. So in this phase, I think you start to make some tactical adjustments. You do some A/B tests. Perhaps you reduce friction in some of your key user paths, and you really start to use data and leverage it to make good decisions. And if you continue that and you're able to continue to make those adjustments, over time you're going to develop strategic insights. You're going to start to understand the channels that users are coming to you through, and you're going to be able to optimize for those different paths that bring people in. And if you really stay at it, and if you're able to develop the right segments and the right samples behind those segments, you may get to a point, and I think this is still relatively rare, as much as we talk about big data and we talk about predictive, I think it's still something that a lot of organizations struggle to achieve. At least that's what we've been told from other folks. You get to a point where you actually do have predictive attributes, and you're able to be proactive in your personalization to the user. And I think that's really the holy grail that we all want to get to. So while it's a journey, it's also a fight for survival. And again, just like with Anna's coffee introduction to me, I'm kind of showing my Northwest roots here with my metaphor. If you choose spawning salmon to describe a business process, you just might be from Washington. So the way I think about it is we all want to get up here to the spawning grounds, which is where predictive segments are developed and released into the wild. In this scenario, the salmon represents your testing program. The current is the constant pressure for quarterly earnings and showing results now. And the grizzly bear would be your CFO. And if you don't swim smart enough and fast enough, your CFO's rapacious appetite for resources may just swallow your testing program whole. So this was all recipes prior to automation. So in our environment prior to introducing Maximizer as a tool, a test idea would get proposed. That would then go into our product backlog, which is its own fight for resources. Everything, of course, is subject to prioritization, which means you have to have a pretty strong business case behind the idea to begin with, almost such a strong business case that it's something you don't really have to test. But assuming you do still have a reason to do a test, you know, a spec will get written. You'll have a dev project to code the traffic splitting rules. There'll be a BI request to create a variable and the tracking for those A and B pools behind your test. That'll go through coding and release. And then after that, you'll do some ad hoc monitoring and reporting and analysis. And I say ad hoc because it's very rare for this particular function to be something that an organization staffs for from start to finish. So you may have, you may have a data scientist on staff. You may have someone with some statistical horsepower. But unless you've built that into sort of the entire cycle, chances are when you go to do that analysis, it is going to be somewhat ad hoc. In my experience, a lot of times these tests are inconclusive just because you don't have that really robust structure for running these kinds of tests. And it's also, this is incredibly laborious. It has a very long cycle on it. So needless to say, we did not run a lot of tests this way. So since we've automated, and actually this deck is a little out of date at this point, but at the time we put it together, we were well over 20 discrete tests that we had run. Our conservative estimate of the business impact, the value of the tests that we ran in that first year is at least $1 million. And we're now on the path towards more predictive uses. We're trying to understand our users better, do more segment discovery, with an eye towards getting to that ultra sophisticated predictive model that that we want to get to. So that's where we got after year one. What do we see as the keys to proving what testing and personalization can do? So what I would submit to you is that you kind of have to think about two different things in that first year: complexity versus scale. I think the temptation is you want to get something that is very sophisticated, really cool early on, but that may not be where the big wins are located in year one. So that leads me to my first lesson that I think we did a good job of heeding in year one, which is don't bite off more than you can chew. So it's good to dream big. It's good to be focused on where you want to get to down the road. Although I would say that my chipmunk friend in this slide looks a little worried by the scale of what he's tried to tackle. That ambition is good unless it leads you here. And so for anyone who slept through high school English class, this is Captain Ahab. He is about to harpoon a symbol of his own obsession, and his refusal to let go drags him to the bottom of the ocean. And sorry, I should have said spoiler alert before I got into this. It kills him. And this would be you if you have some really sophisticated hypothesis about user segments and what they want to see, and you try to prove it out. It's tough to get the sample size, and you come away with nothing, and you don't have a result to show for that first year. So that's definitely the outcome you want to avoid. So my next lesson is if you're new to testing, so if your organization has not done a lot of testing before, I would start small. Job number one, as soon as you automate, is to just get familiar with the tool. Get used to seeing the results of a test, get used to reading those results, and just get familiar with the system that you're working with. So pick something really easy, like button colors. So in our case, we chose something a little bit more ambitious. We chose to test this landing page. And as a marketer, this page used to cause me great pain. This is from our old site. This page no longer exists. But as you can tell, very text-heavy, very feature-driven. We even had a video that essentially had more copy. We thought we could do better. So we turned to our design team, and they produced this alternate version of the page. So much more visual, We have a video with people actually using the tool that we were selling, much more benefit-driven copy. We thought this was a huge step forward. And in fact, it was. This was a very successful first test. We got some lift. It was very validating in terms of the ability to run A/B tests and see something positive come out of it. Now, hindsight being 2020, we wish we had started with button colors, just because this involved a lot of HTML production that stretched out our time to run that first test, whereas I think if we had done something we could have done through the WYSIWYG tool, we would have gotten a result sooner, and that would have been useful at the time. But still a very successful test. So my next lesson is that complexity does not necessarily equal impact. So the next thing that we decided to tackle was something that introduced user segment targeting. We had this placement on our old site. It was a static placement. We called it the lozenge, and it said the same thing to all users. So again, from a marketing standpoint, this pained us a little in that we were using this space that was run of site, very prominent, and it would even try to sell something to people who are already purchasing that product. So we introduced a test where we said, let's rotate what this says based on what we know about the user. Seemed like the perfectly right thing to do. There was just one small problem. And that is, that placement never generated a lot of volume for us. It wasn't particularly meaningful to us as a business. So even if you generate 100% lift on something that generates, say, 50 orders, that's a whole lot less exciting than something that generates 30% lift on something that generates 1,000 orders, just as sample math. So the former, that'll get you a pat on the back and, hey, we'll get them next time, slugger. The latter will get you a victory celebration, which is, of course, what you want. Our reaction to that test was to refocus on something that was a little bit simpler as a test, but targeted something more meaningful to us as a business. So this, again, is a page on our old site. This, if it looks a little antiquated, that's why. Doesn't exist on our new site. But this was where we were pointing all of our free registration efforts on our old site. So if we had a promotion, we're trying to get somebody to join our community, which is very important to us. We want people in our community. We were pointing them here. And we looked at this and said, it's a very flat page from the standpoint membership information. It doesn't really explain why you should join. We also thought we could just improve some of the usability of it. And so that's what we did. We changed a call to action, join for free. We took our age certification, moved it up to a more intuitive spot, and we changed join all recipes to submit. And we saw a 26% lift from the test, which for something where we're pointing all of our free registration efforts, that's meaningful to the business. So a very simple test, simple A/B, no user segments involved, but we're getting warmer from the standpoint of having an impact on our business. And that leads me to another lesson for that first year. So in terms of complexity versus scale, always go for scale. Pick the low-hanging fruit. And what I mean by that is, find something that's already having an impact with high value to the business. So either it's something where you've got a high volume running through that page, or it's something that's generating a very high value transaction. So for us, this was our new registration page, and it actually was also our sign-in page. And that was the default. This was designed first and foremost for people, a returning user who is signing back into their account. We looked at that and said, well, what if we delivered something that was defaulted to sign up for people who weren't users? And with what we knew about the user, we should be able to tell if they already are a member or not a member. And so we again changed this so it was more benefits driven, more call to action, didn't force the user to click on a separate link in order to hit sign up. And we saw 40% lift from this. And when you consider that we sign up a couple of million new users as members of our community every year, this is really important to our business. And 40% lift here was really significant. And really that test was enough for us to call the first year a success. So We went from a simple test to perhaps being a little too complex to doing something that had real impact, and that was enough for us to call that first year successful. So that's how we think about testing in the first year. Obviously, you have to have the right team. That's a critical component to achieving that sort of success. So I want to talk about staffing, which is the other critical component. So if you ascribe to the management philosophy of having one neck to choke, you want to make sure it's the right neck. And my metaphor here is probably a bad one. Superman would be a horrible champion for your testing and personalization program. Let's start with the obvious. His neck is impossible to choke unless your name happens to be Zod, and we all know that Zod has a hard time getting into a management position. What you actually want is you want his alter ego. You want Clark Kent. You want somebody who is inquisitive, can put themselves in the shoes of the user or your sort of regular customer. You don't want somebody who thinks that they're bulletproof and invincible and able to perform incredible feats like leaping over tall buildings in a single bound. You want somebody who's going to be driven by the data, who's going to be looking for that tool to tell them where those where the heroics are going to be found. And you also want somebody who knows the business and knows where to look for gains and is convinced that testing and personalization can help realize those gains. If you had to choose between somebody who is, say, a data scientist, knows how to run a ton of analytics and things like that, and someone who simply knows the business and has a knack for spotting those wins, you'd want somebody who has that business sense, because a lot of the data analytics, a lot of the data science is going to be coming from the tool that you've chosen. But you still want somebody who is going to respect the data, make decisions off of that data, and be able to read it. So in our case, the reality was different. We did not have just one neck to choke. We had a product owner, several business owners. And in that first year, we actually had one business group that became kind of the primary driver of tests. We had test ideas that came from multiple people, and that was a huge strength for us. That helped make that first year successful. So the way I think about it is we started here with a group trust fall. We wound up with a slightly smaller group trust fall, but most importantly, no one hit the floor. You also need an implementation team. When it comes to testing, big ideas don't necessarily matter. And what I mean by that is that you may have this big idea, but as soon as you translate it into pixels on the page, it boils down to a bunch of details that determine whether that's going to be successful or not. So the temptation is to think, oh, I've got a WYSIWYG tool. It's super easy. Anyone can get a test out there, and boom, we're going to see lots of successful results. But really, you need really smart people who can think through all the intricacies, all the details of the tests that you're going to run. So going back to the low-hanging fruit example I provided earlier, it seemed like such a simple test. We were thinking, hey, we've got this page, let's test this page instead, this design versus that design. But when we really started thinking through what it took to get that test out there, we realized there was a deceptive amount of complexity behind it. So as soon as you start breaking things into user segments, and then you've got X number of links on the page, and maybe you're running an A/B test, things start to multiply quickly. You can start winding up with tens of user flows and tens of different use cases. And in our case, there were at least 14 discrete use cases behind those two variants. Only 2 of those were the intended experiences that we envisioned in the original test. We were only thinking about 2, we had 14. And then we also identified at least 3 potential confounding factors prior to launch of the test. In fact, we lived with some of those as we went into the test. They didn't derail the test, but they did affect the magnitude of the lift that we saw once we fixed at least one of the confounding factors that we were facing. And then on top of that, the biggest challenge we gave ourselves, we were modifying a sign-in page to create a sign-up page. And that meant that if somebody was already a member and we dropped them into the wrong targeting pool and they wanted to sign in, they were just going to get taken back to that sign-up experience, which meant we essentially created an infinite loop for them. We had painted ourselves into a corner. We found a way to resolve that through a page mask. But it just goes to show that really, if you don't have kind of that detailed technical know-how, Lucius Fox, Batman is really just Christian Bale in a cheap suit. Still pretty cool, but definitely not at all bulletproof. So when you think about those implementation functions, and these really aren't intended to be functions, these aren't meant to be departments. The first one is user experience. So thinking about those use cases, being able to map those out, being able to take the user flows and map those out as well to understand how those need to be incorporated into the test. You may also need, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, if it goes beyond the WYSIWYG tools that you're going to get within the automation platform that you use, you may have to do HTML and other front-end coding. We certainly have run into this a number of times with the tests that we've done. Dev support is obviously important as well. In our case, we ran afoul of an issue of just technical compatibility between the version of JavaScript we were running on our site and the version that Maximizer was using. We were only able to resolve that with dev support. And you may very well have data integrations in terms of delivering back-end data from, say, a CRM system to the testing and personalization tool. So there's things like that where you may need dev support from your end to make the test possible. QA and troubleshooting is a big one, and again, this can either be practitioners or it could involve development skills. We had one test that we were running where we were trying to redirect people from a desktop version on our old site to a mobile version. The URL mapping wasn't one-to-one, so we had to wait for a link to load. If that took too long, the test failed and we got some bad data. It really took having someone with in-depth knowledge of the site and how it was coded to be able to catch that and correct it. And then finally, you may have coding that happens within the testing and personalization tool. And the good thing about that is, for example, if you're trying to replace dynamic content, you may have to write some sort of rule within the testing platform. That's the easiest part to outsource, and we, for example, have an allowance of hours with Maximizer that we use when we get into those more complex test cases. So just to sum up our lessons from year one, start small, look for scale, find a hero or two, make sure the team is equipped for the details of execution. So if you can do all of that, your journey won't look at all like my original metaphor. Your CFO will be a very happy bear with a nice big pot of honey, and you will be jumping over the falls to the spawning grounds. So thank you, good luck. And if anyone wants to find me, you can find me on Allrecipes. We have vanity URLs coming soon, so in the meantime, I am cook137422282, and on LinkedIn, Paul Krylov. So that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul and Carl, for those fabulous presentations. That was really, really great. So we only have a couple minutes for some Q&A, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Okay, first question is for Paul. What has been the most common factor affecting your tests? Regional differences or device type?
Easily device type. What we've seen every time we've run one of these tests, device type has been starkly different. We get very different results if we're talking about mobile versus desktop, and it's really something that we've started to look at in every single test we run. It dramatically affects the results that we see.
Excellent. Okay, next question is for Carl. Carl, which metrics do your clients typically start tracking at the onset of an optimization program?
That's an excellent question. The general rollout model is one that goes after the obvious ones, right? The big conversion events, so the actual purchase conversion, the associated revenue, the number of products that are in a shopping cart at the time of purchase. So those are ones that we tend to build at a site level so that we can include those in all of our campaigns. The ones that we tend to focus on, however, are the ones that are relevant to the stage in the overall visitor journey that is in question. So for example, if Web Analytics is telling us that visitors view a lot of products, but they don't necessarily add to cart. So there's some sort of challenge, some sort of hurdle that we're trying to overcome between the product page and the cart page, then most likely our focus would be on the product page design, layout, content structure, functionality, things of that nature, and the corresponding metric we would go after there is probably add to cart or save to favorite, something like that. That's typically what we would see on those sorts of pages as the key metric. So we would look at the best and most relevant conversion metric based on where we're actually testing, and then build in a downstream examination for the kind of the final stage of a conversion process, which would be, like I said, purchase or revenue, something along those lines.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. Okay, next question for Paul. Do you run any tests on your mobile site or app?
At this point, so we have a single code base across desktop, mobile, tablet. So we, generally speaking, anytime we're running a test, we try to do it so it's consistent across all device types. There are times when we find that that's not practical, and particularly in our case, because we have a magazine, which is a very common initiative for us to test against, we may focus on one device type or another, and so sometimes we will lock out one device type or the other, depending on what we're doing. So generally speaking, we're going to test across all. That's our preference, since we view it as one experience. But if we have something that we think segments out based on device type, we will restrict the test to one type or another. But since it's single code base, generally speaking, if we do something one place, we want to do it everywhere at the same time. That's different from prior to our new site rolling out. We did more actively segment. We tended to be a lot. We gave ourselves more license to test stuff on our old desktop site because we knew it was going away. It was almost like a playground or sandbox in some respects, and we would be a little more cautious about what we did on the mobile site, knowing that that was the default experience moving forward. So we tried to learn as much as we could from desktop, but nowadays we try to treat everything uniformly.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. Okay. Next question for Carl. Do your clients still utilize A/B testing even after they have been testing for some time and have evolved into multivariate test campaigns?
Sure. That's another good question. I don't think that there's a path that is such that you can't go back to an A/B testing model if you've kind of graduated out of that and you start doing multivariate tests. We generally find that there are still business questions that our clients want to answer in a short period of time. So we can dial down the complexity, arguably, with an A/B test. And there may, in fact, be very specific business questions that need to be addressed, and an A/B test is best suited for that. So it definitely comes back with all the time in terms of my client engagements, where a client that's been testing for a year, 6 months, 3, 4 years, they oftentimes will come back to utilize an A/B test for very specific business questions. IT, for example, might have a very specific question about adding functionality and whether or not they want to do a complete rebuild of the site or some stage of the checkout process. If we're able to do and execute an A/B test which answers that question to determine what the real benefit is, then we would certainly recommend doing that, and clients do it all the time in terms of their overall maturity curve. In fact, there are certain times when going back to A/B tests reflects a certain stage of maturity and advancement, because you're answering very specific, detailed questions that were not necessarily the low-hanging fruit A/B sorts of questions that you were asking, on day one of your program.
Excellent. Thanks, Carl. Okay, next question is for Paul. I'm wondering, once they saw positive results in the testing environment and chose to implement the change on the live site, if he was asked to report what the true impact to revenue was overall, and if so, how did he do it?
So there's kind of an interplay between two different systems that goes on when you're rolling out these tests. So first of all, as we went into that test, we already had a baseline from our standard web analytics package around our our registration performance. So we had that as kind of a baseline. We tested, and obviously we're looking for uplift within the test. But then separately, we're still doing all the the normal tracking we would do, normal monitoring of registration. And so we expected, based on what we were seeing within the test, that as we rolled that out to a greater percentage of traffic, that we would see a proportional gain in the baseline metric that we're looking at. And we did. We saw that upswing. And then at a later date, what has to happen with testing is, once you have something that you validate with testing, you need to actually build it in as your default. And so that did happen. We took the variant experience that we had built within the testing tool, and we rolled it out as our default hard-coded experience on our site, and continued to look at the same baseline metric we were tracking before the test, during the test, and then after the test. And what we've seen is the actual result has mirrored what testing said we should have expected. We were expecting a 40% lift. We've actually seen more like a 50% lift, and that has carried forward and has been stable since we rolled out the default experience. So there's kind of a shifting back and forth, and you definitely need to have good numbers to begin with from that other system before